Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to today's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. To this day, I still don't know what happened or how to explain it. I live in Yorkshire, England, which in some places is a very green area with loads of trees and hills, etc. Where I live as a child growing up, I lived relatively close to a woodland area with roughly 5 to 10 miles of woodland. Now, as a kid, this was amazing with my friends as we could play hide and seek or build tree houses or forts for hours. So I was never scared of it with or without friends. In one situation, I was walking in the woods when I was around 8 alone. I remember it being dark, but only 4 or 5 p.m., so it must have been close to winter time. My friends and I had been working on a fort, and I was collecting sticks for it in my spare time, as I was really devoted. Fun fact, I went to visit my hometown last year. The fort is still there, just looking extremely abandoned, with old cans and crisp packets on the floor. I knew roughly where I was, but wasn't too sure when I found a weird formation of rocks. It didn't mean anything to me, as me and my friends made things like this, but this was not us, and it was definitely man-made. I decided to stay around the area because I didn't want to get lost. After 2 or 3 trips back from there, or to our fort, I noticed a deer in the woods. My dad had told me there were deer and fox in the woods, but uncommon to see, so I was excited and followed it. Now looking back on it, it moved very unnaturally, with it almost jumping and skipping like it was brand new to walking on 4 legs. Now, as a kid, I didn't think anything of it because I had never seen a deer before, so I didn't know how they moved. A couple of minutes after following it, I tripped over a rock and made some noise and some sticks. The deer froze. It turned slowly around and stared in my direction, so I slowly got back up and stared at it from behind the tree. It started sniffing around the stones and suddenly stared at me. I'd say it was 100 to 150 feet away from me. I was scared and ran away. I ran for a minute or two until I caught my breath. I remember I had a mixture of excitement and nervousness. I turned around to look back in the direction I had run from, and to my surprise, the deer was there staring at me. I hadn't heard anything following me. This really freaked me out. I was in pure terror. I ran out of the forest and did not stop until I was safely out. The entrance to the woods where I went in and out of was down a steep hill, so I get to the bottom onto the street and stared back up. My heart was racing, and there it was, still looking out of the woods at me. It terrified me, and still to this day, I can still remember the chill that went down my spine. I was so scared I started to cry when all I heard was, "Don't." I looked around and no one was there. Then I heard, "Come back, please," in an almost human voice. I could make out the words, but it sounded almost inaudible, like an old radio. I ran to my house and cried to my mom and dad, but they didn't know what to say. I had nightmares, but still couldn't figure it out. I didn't go into the woods for a good couple of months until I started going back with friends again. The woods gave me a chill, but I never had an experience like that again. Today's second encounter. I was around 8 years old when we first moved into a house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying this house with the backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs. They were worried that one of us might go too far into the forest and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and we were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the woods. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the woods. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they had been playing with found its way past the tree line, they refused to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wiggled out of his grip and sprinted to the house in panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes would hear noises like someone or something walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response. But if we shined a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go too far from the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out in the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She said there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground. It was a little too tall to be a person, sort of distorted, and she said it was convinced it was staring at her. She called my dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door, until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out that there may be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks and stop for months, then start up. My parents eventually installed security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless, though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking toward the woods. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it to the forest. After the third or fourth time this had happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when he sleepwalked. I guess thinking it'd be funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing, as if listening to something, shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she had gone exploring in the woods and had fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in, started calling her name, but quickly realized that it was far too dark to see her, and he could not pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he went and grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back to the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later, while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it, despite the fact I had seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling me, saying she had gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come and help her. As I walked in, the dogs started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called me. and I said I was just helping my mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new house. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got worse. We'd hear knocking on the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows as if someone or something was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We'd often hear scratching or scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got worse and frequent. And one night my mom did not hear the door open and he was sleepwalking. He woke up standing at the fence staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we had moved in, we all woke up to find the back door fully open. The security camera footage showed it slowly swung open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still has night terrors and still suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A couple of nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, asked me if I thought the door being open that final night meant whatever was out there finally had gotten in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we all should be exercised just in case something latched on to us all those years ago. But I believe he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest behind the house at night, but I get the feeling that given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. Today's third encounter. I was practically raised in the woods. I spent a large amount of time out there, both day and night. I wouldn't call myself a woodsman, mostly because I don't have a flannel shirt unbuttoned halfway down my sternum or a big bushy beard. But all of my experiences with the woods and various sounds you hear in them are from Appalachia, the Pacific Northwest, and New England. I have no real experience with nocturnal animals found in southwestern United States, which is where this happened. I am not familiar with the desert creatures, though I have heard the chosen one partied with them occasionally. Since I didn't see anything, I can't tell you what it was. I probably couldn't tell you what it was even if I had seen it, but it's the sound. I've heard all kinds of nocturnal animal and insect sounds, and I can identify a good number of them. But whatever this was, it chilled me to my bones. I was visiting some friends of mine who live near Van Horn, Texas. One morning at around 4 a.m., I was outside smoking a cigarette. I started to hear what sounded like a few dogs barking off in the distance. Nothing out of the ordinary. One of their neighbors had 2 or 3 of them. I figured they had just seen some type of animal or something and got them all excited. Thing was, as I continued to smoke, I started to pick out something different that was mixed in with the barking. It caught my attention, but nothing more. It just happened to notice it was there, but over the course of the next few minutes the dog stopped barking, and there was still that same sound. It was gradually drawing closer to where I was. If I had to describe it, I would say that it was something trying to sound like a dog, but not quite getting it right. It continued to slowly move closer until it sounded like it was right inside the nearby tree line, about 30 feet away from me and, of course, just far enough away to not be within reach of the exterior light on the other side of the garage. What struck me is the sound seemed to be coming from higher than I was tall, but I could hear it moving around on the ground. I went inside and stayed there. As I said, I am familiar with nocturnal animal sounds. I've heard coyote, wolves, bear, that all seemed like they were very close by while camping, but this sound scared me. Tonight's final encounter. Hello everyone, my name is Alexander. I am 20 years old and I live in Austria. I have my first job after graduating technical school and I'm very happy with my current life. But recent memories started to pop up and I can barely sleep. I have been feeling like I need to share this with somebody. Only 3 people know about this until now: my fiance, my mom, and my granddad. I grew up in a pretty rural area within Austria. We moved there when I was 6, and since then I've been seeing things. It began by having the feeling of being watched as I passed our windows at night. Initially, I thought it may be just me being scared by the dark. Usually, I just saw our cats outside the window, and mostly it was nothing. One day, I remember going down to get a bottle of water, and I saw them looking at me from outside. We had a winter garden. I don't know the English term, but it's basically a small room attached to the main building made out of glass. In front of the winter garden, from the outside, was a floor made of gravel. There were 2 and 3 creatures with different heights crawling with their long, skinny arms, grayish tone. I would say a mix of gray and a slight touch of brown. No hair, just skin. I can't remember the amount of fingers or toes. I remember the shape, but I didn't count. The reason I said looked was because they had no eyes. Humanoid body, but very long and skinny. I can only describe their body type like one of those very skinny pre-puberty kids from school. The big one was 2.5 meters in height, since the winter garden was that height as well. The second one was a bit larger than me when I saw it at first, so I assume 1.6 to 1.7 meters. I am a bit ashamed because I'm crying a bit while sharing this. They scared me, walking around the house and peeking through the second set of windows that were located in the front of the kitchen. Kitchen and winter garden were connected. I didn't scream, I was shocked. I didn't want to move, breathe, look directly at them, or move away. After a time period that I can not describe, they moved away toward the forest. That was basically 5 meters away from the house. I ran to my bedroom and hid under my bed. The next morning, I decided not to tell my dad or mom because it was unreal. Did I really went down? Did I actually see anything? Was it a dream? The feeling when I saw them was like a curtain had fell down. Years passed until I was 17. I could barely remember what happened, but gained an insane fear of the outside around our house at night. I felt watched at any time my head peeked at a window, only when there was no snow. I don't know why. At that point, I was only living in my parents' house on the weekends because I had already moved into housing for school, about an hour and a half from my house. It was a Saturday. I went down to make a midnight snack and the curtain fell. I saw them, having their heads turned into my direction. Their movement is similar to an animal looking at you, walking to a different spot. Peeking, looking, and walking. The shock kicked in, and I did not want to move. After 20 minutes, we had a working clock at the time out there kitchen. I had moved because they showed no aggression and just looked at me. I turned to get my water, grabbed it, ran up to the room. I cried out of shock, I think. The following months it happened again and again, to the point that I got used to pull myself together and move. I ate cornflakes while they watched me. At this point, I was already convinced I had turned insane. Everything I saw was an illusion, hyper-realistic schizophrenia, something like that. Closely after I turned 18, I know this because that was closely before I moved out because of a dispute with me and my dad. I started looking a bit closer at how the surroundings reacted to them. The gravel, the stones moved by them stepping on it. They were moved by their arms and feet, just so slightly, just like when you step on it. The shock set in again. I started to cry again. They moved, as always, slowly away around the house, inside the forest. The night had haunted me forever. Every time I try to recall that night, I get into a shocked state. There was a balcony in front of a big window that was also a door that I could fully open. In front of the balcony was the gravel floor, so basically the winter garden roof was my balcony. It was a very warm night, so I had opened a window and the curtain blocking potentially insects from going inside. I was lying in bed trying to sleep. I could hear footsteps on the gravel. Could have been cats, but I kept listening. I used the indirect light from the screen on my smartphone towards the curtain. The curtain moves barely to the side. The head peeked. The biggest one of them climbed up the winter garden on top of the balcony. Shock sets in, and my body doesn't want to move out of fear. My head moves backward, and the curtain wiggles a bit. I hear gravel sounds. I move away a few weeks later because I couldn't do my mandatory internship from there. I never saw them again. Afterward, I finally started talking about it with my mom and fiance and my grandma. Sorry for the poor structure and lack of detail. My English is not my first language. This is more out of my heart. Currently, I'm watching Stranger Things with my fiance on Netflix, and it brought up a lot of trauma. Wow, I'm going to tell you something really quick, and it's pretty crazy that this poor person had that, those feelings and that come up while they were watching Stranger Things. I was talking to a fellow the other day, and we were just talking about soft disclosures and Hollywood and this and that, and we're just, movies, TV shows, and I said to him, it almost feels like Stranger Things is real. The more we get to learn about, these crazy cryptids, these, strange goings on. And I said, what think about this. The Demigorgon, it resembles a crawler minus the flower-like head when it's going to eat you. It's very elongated, skinny, long arms, long legs, very fast. And a lot of these portal things have been seen lately. Just very strange stuff. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I want to thank you all for your support, and let's do this. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.